This is a easy to read passage on the duties of a history writer. The writer of history, I believe, has a number of duties vis-a-vis the reader if he wants to keep him reading. The first is to distill. So basically, it's on duties of a writer of history. A number of duties. The first is to distill. He must do the preliminary work for the reader, assemble the information, make sense of it, select the essential, discard the irrelevant, above all, discard the irrelevant. So he has a lot of things to do. But in all this, assemble information, make sense of it, select the essential part, discard the irrelevant is the most important part, and put the rest together so that it forms a developing dramatic narrative. Narrative, which has been said, is the lifeblood of history. Narrative, telling a tale, is the lifeblood of history. That's the most important aspect of history. To offer a mass of undigested facts, of names not identified, places not located, is of no use to the reader and is simple laziness on the part of the author, or pedantry to show how much he has read. To discard the unnecessary. So the key to writing history is the narrative. That's the lifeblood of history. And the writer of history has to be good at not just assimilating information but also discarding irrelevant information. To discard the unnecessary requires courage and requires extra work, as exemplified by Pascal's effort to explain an idea to a friend in a letter which rambled on for pages and ended. So Pascal wrote a letter to explain an idea to a friend, and what did he do? The letter was several pages long. He rambled on and on. At the end, he says, I'm sorry to have wearied you with so long a letter, but I didn't have the time to write a short one. So what can you infer from this? To write a short letter needs more time than to write a longer letter, because you have to decide what to include in the letter and what not to include. Rambling, just putting your thoughts as they come in a letter is easy, but to select the important parts and to discard the irrelevant is what takes more time. The historian is continually being beguiled, means deceived, down fascinating byways and sidetracks. But the art of writing, the test of an artist, is to resist the beguilement and cleave to the subject. So constantly you are being confronted by a lot of facts which try to sidetrack you from the main point. And the key to the art of writing is to stick to your subject and ignore all those beguilements, as he puts it. Should the historian be an artist? The author is asking a question. Certainly. A conscious art should be part of his equipment. A conscious art, the art of writing, should be part of his equipment. Macaulay describes him as half poet, half philosopher. Macaulay describes a historian as half poet, half philosopher. I do not aspire to either of these heights. The author says, I don't want to be called a poet or a philosopher. I'm not aspiring to be either of them. I think of myself as a storyteller, a narrator who deals in in true stories and not fiction. So how does the author view himself? Obviously, we can infer the author is a writer of history. He's a storyteller. What kind of stories does he tell? True stories, not fiction. That's the important part of the passage. The distinction is not one of relative value. It is simply that history interests me more than fiction. He says, I'm not saying that fiction is not valuable. It's not a question of the relative value of history to fiction. He says, I am interested. History interests me more than fiction. I agree with Van Ranke, the great 19th century German historian, who said that when he compared the portrait of Louis XI in Scott's Quentin Durward with the portrait of the same king in the memoirs of Philip Comines, Louis's minister, he found the truth more interesting and beautiful than the romance. So he is showing two things. One is the portrait, the portrait with the portrait of the same king. Two versions he takes, and he says he was more fascinated by the history, the truth, more than the romance. What is the historian's task? To find out, and then the whole lot is in German. We'll go to the English part. Find out what really happened, or literally how it really was. His goal is one that will remain forever just beyond our grasp for reasons I explained in a note on sources in the Guns of August, a paragraph that no one ever reads but I think is the best thing in the book. So the author says, Rank, who asks, what is a historian's task? According to Rank, the historian's task is to find out what really happened and how it really was. His goal is one that will remain forever just beyond our grasps for reasons. Why would his goal be just beyond our grasp? Because we who write about the past were not really there. We can never be really certain that we have recaptured things as it really was, but at least we can stay within the evidence. Rank says the historian's job is to show things as they really were. The author says that goal, are we meeting it? We try, but are we meeting it? It's difficult. Why? Because we were not there when that history is a record of the past. We were not there when it happened. So our best effort is to stay as close as we can within the evidence. We have evidence of what happened and we should stick to it as far as we can without, bringing in irrelevant stuff. I do not invent anything, even the weather. This is, as a historian, I don't invent anything. One of my readers told me he particularly liked a passage. So author has written a book called The Guns of August. And he says one of my readers told me he particularly liked a passage in The Guns of August which tells how the British army landed in France and how on that afternoon there was a sound of summer thunder in the air and the sun went down in a blood red glow. He thought it was an artistic touch of doom, but the fact is it was true. The author says, when I write history, I don't invent anything. Even the weather. If I mention the weather in a historical narrative, in telling history, I don't invent it. So a reader had once commented to him that I loved this expression you gave about the summer thunder in the air and sun going down. It's an artistic touch of doom. The author says that was a fact. That's what happened according to the evidence, and he just mentioned it. Which of the following, if false, would best corroborate the contention of the author? Now be careful for if false. So what does it mean? The statement, if it is wrong, would support which of the author's ideas. So what are you looking for in the options? An option which contradicts what the author has said in the passage. If you choose an option that contradicts what the author has said in the passage, if it is false, it would support the author's contention. Clear? So let's look for an option which goes exactly opposite to what has been stated in the passage, so that when it is false, it will corroborate the contention of the author. The history writer has certain obligations to the reader and should follow them. The author has said that, right? What are the duties of a history writer? Well, these are the duties and he should follow them. So if this is false, it would contradict this point of the author. So A cannot be my answer. The history writer has no obligations towards the reader and is free to write what he, she, they like. Exactly contradicts what the author said. So if this is false, it would corroborate the author's contention. Therefore, that's my answer. B.